Hello there friends, it's Ashley here from the Loopy Lamb and theloopylamb.com, and thanks so much for stopping by the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my review of Mix and Match Modern Crochet Blankets, 100 patterned and textured strips for thousands of unique throws by Esme Crick. And thanks to the publisher, I have a copy of this book to give away to one lucky winner, so make sure that you watch the video till the end to find out how you can enter to win a copy of the book for yourself. Now, the aim for my videos, as always, is to give you as much information about the book. So if you can't get access to it in store to take a look at it, and you're curious about whether or not you should add this to your crochet library, I want to try and give you as much information about the book as possible to help you make those decisions. So let's hop on into Mix and Match Modern Crochet Blankets. So a little bit about the author before we get started. Esme Crick is a UK-based designer and author. This is her second book that she's published with David and Charles Publishing. Her first book being Mosaic Crochet Workshop, which I reviewed, I believe it was last year, and that was a really beautiful book as well. So taking a look, we've got our table of contents, and you can see that we've got some really fun modern color combinations. And the photography, as always, is absolutely stunning in these David and Charles books. Now, the premise of this book is that they want to kind of shake up how we consider making our crochet blankets. And if you take a look at these blankets, it's very obvious that they have a striped effect to them. And that's because each pattern is made of these little crochet strips that are then seamed together to make the blanket. Now, the book contains 100 strip patterns, and the book itself, the strip pattern sections, is broken down into 7 different sections. We've got classic stitches, textured stitches, mosaic crochet, filet crochet, embellishments, ribbing and cable, tapestry crochet, and baubles, puffs, and popcorns. Now, the patterns are written in the US terminology, but you can find a US to UK terminology conversion chart coming up here on page 14. And page 14 is where you're going to find all the additional information that you're going to need to know when you're actually working the patterns, which is your abbreviations, basic abbreviations that are used in the patterns, and this little information here on the repeat formats. Now, the materials that were used in the book, the author does tell you right up front in the beginning of the book that she only uses 1 crochet hook size for all of the patterns in this book, which is a 5mm crochet hook. And she uses Sheep's, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, Sheep's Color Crafter DK weight yarn for all of the blankets. But she does encourage you to experiment with your hook and yarn combination to find the drape that works for you. And so I do recommend reading the beginning of the book here, where we start in your tools and materials section on page 7 and how to use this book on page 8, as they will be helpful guides for you before diving into the patterns. Now, each of the patterns for the strips includes a crochet chart or diagram, and you can find a stitch chart symbol legend, for lack of a better word, here on page 16. If you're not familiar with reading how to read a stitch chart, you can find a brief overview of how to do that here. Now, included in the pattern are 5 different sample blankets that you can see are comprised of all these different strips. And they have included a materials list here in this section on the left. Now, there's no gauge information included in the book, and there's no row count included for these patterns. So you're going to have to kind of experiment in terms of how to get your strips to fit together. And these actual ball numbers of how much yarn you're going to need could vary from person to person depending on your personal gauge intention. So I would only use these material lists as a guide in terms of what colors to use if you wanted to make these exact blankets in these exact colors, because the yardage would vary depending on your gauge. And now it does give a finished size for these blankets as 40 inches by 50 inches. But again, there's no way for you to guarantee that you'll get to that size without the gauge or some experimentation on your part. The blankets themselves are beautiful. I love the color combos that were selected for these blankets. And we've got some really bold choices like this one here, which are just beautiful. Now, in addition to the blanket strips, you can find patterns for a bag pattern and a scarf pattern that surprised me because I didn't see it anywhere in any of the marketing for this book, but it just goes to show how versatile these little strips can be, because in each pattern they give you the stitch multiple that's needed to adjust the size of the strip. So if you need to make it wider or longer, it does give the multiples to do that. Now, as you can see, the way it's laid out is just like a stitch dictionary. So if you're familiar with stitch dictionaries, you'll find that this layout is very familiar. And we're right now in the classic stitch section, which is your very basic stitches. So like single crochet, half double, double crochet, and then we start getting a little bit of texture like crunch and alpine stitch, Catherine wheel and sedge. Now the supports for makers are found at the back of the book. The rest of the supports, I should say, start on page 134. Now we've got our basic stitches, which are accompanied by illustrations rather than photos. And each of these images has a letter that corresponds to the written instructions. So just pay attention to which letter is corresponding to the written instructions, because on first glance, I thought that the images would work vertically because that's how it would line up with the writing, but that's not how it works. So just keep an eye on that. I'm sure I'm not the only one that will be tricked by that. So this section does cover all of the basic stitches. They're very clear and straightforward. And if you're new to mosaic crochet and tapestry crochet, there's these brief introductions to how to do the techniques here on pages 138 and 139. Now, Esme uses the inset mosaic crochet technique. And as you can see, these are the only images that you're going to get that as support. So if you're a visual learner, then you might have to go online to find some resources to assist you with this, because it can be confusing, especially the way that Esme does inset mosaic, because each row of these on the graph here actually counts for 2 rows. So unless you're really paying attention or you're familiar with her technique, this can be a little confusing. Right, so I just wish that there had been some visual supports for that for people who are visual learners. Then on page 140, we're going to talk about finishing techniques, joining our strips, edging, blocking, and creating pom-poms and tassels. Now, the big thing that I think for a lot of makers will be that to join the strips, the author recommends that you're whip stitching the 2 strips together. So you're literally just sewing the strips by hand. Now, if I were to do that, it depends on what strips I'd be using, I guess. But whip stitch can be a little messy, or mattress stitch would also be a good recommendation. But if you're not somebody who likes to seam and you're one of those folks that avoids seaming at all costs, then that might be a break it point for you. However, do a quick Google search, do some search for something like how to join granny squares, and try to find a different way to join the strips other than the hand seaming if sewing is not your jam. There are definitely options. They're just not included in this book. Now, one other support that I found was missing that I really wish was included, especially because it would just make this book a little bit more accessible to beginners, is letting people know that when you're making the strips, because each of the strips doesn't necessarily use the same stitch height. So some of these, and there's great examples here on the front. So we've got some mosaic crochet, we've got filet crochet, and then we've got some, it looks like back loop only single crochets here. The single crochet and half double or double crochet, they're going to be 2 different stitch heights here. So you can't say, make 40 rows of this dark orange strip here, and then 40 rows of this light orange strip, and have them be the exact same height. The odds are that that's not going to work for you. So you need to experiment with how many rows you're going to need for each strip that you're making in your blanket. So you could write that down, or make one strip to the length that you want it to be, and then match all your other strips up to that very first strip. But that is something that I wish was included, because if I were a new maker sitting down with this book, I would expect that I could just pop out, say 80 to 100 rows for each strip, and then they would match up, and that's not necessarily the case. So just a little bit of support around that would have been great to see. Overall, I think this is a really fun approach to making crochet blankets, and the ideas that you can get in terms of mixing and matching is almost endless, really. 100 different strips. You can mix and match them and make a different blanket for everybody that you know and still have more options to pursue. So I really like that. And I would recommend this book for experienced crocheters who are looking for a fun and unique way to make crochet blankets that either don't mind seaming or don't mind doing some troubleshooting in order to get their blankets just right, or really just looking for a fun way to try some different stitches and different techniques that you can use to create blankets in different projects as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I am giving away a copy of this book to one lucky winner. If you're interested in entering to win, check out the written version of this review, which I've linked in the description box below. And on that page, you'll find the giveaway entry form as well as the full giveaway rules. So that's it for me today, friends. I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, please hit that like button and please consider subscribing to this video. If you like free crochet patterns, please check out my blog, theloopylamb.com, where I've got over 200 free crochet patterns, many of which have step-by-step video tutorials. If you have any comments about this book, like you've used it and you'd like to share your experience with the community, please share that in the comment section below. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to help. Again, leave that in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks so much for watching, friends. Happy hooking, and I'll see you next time.